They tell you that spiritual awakening will make you feel alive, that once you wake up, you'll find peace, purpose, and clarity. But what if the opposite happens? What if awakening doesn't make you feel more alive, but emptier than ever? Carl Jung once said, "Enlightenment is not imagining figures of light, but making the darkness conscious." And that's where most people get it wrong. Because when the light of awareness first hits your life, it doesn't illuminate beauty. It exposes the illusion. You begin to see that the things you once chased, success, validation, admiration, even happiness, were all built on a fragile identity that never truly existed. And that realization, it kills your motivation. Before awakening, you were driven by desire. To prove yourself, to become someone, to win, to be loved, to be seen. That fire pushed you forward. It made you wake up early, work harder, dream bigger. But awakening takes that away. You start to see through it all. The masks, the roles, the endless striving. You realize that the you who wanted all those things was just an image, a social costume stitched together from expectations, fears, and borrowed dreams. At first, that truth feels liberating, and then it feels devastating. Because if that version of you wasn't real, then who's left to dream? Who's left to strive? That's the silent crisis no one talks about after spiritual awakening. The collapse of meaning, the death of drive. The strange, haunting emptiness that follows the light. Jung understood this better than anyone. He called it the night sea journey. The phase after illumination when the ego dies and the self stands alone in the dark. Most people mistake that darkness for failure. They think, something's wrong with me. I should feel inspired, peaceful, awakened. But Jung would say, no, this is necessary. Because the old motivation must die before authentic purpose can be born. Think of it like this. When a caterpillar becomes a butterfly, it doesn't grow wings overnight. It dissolves, literally, completely, inside a cocoon. It becomes formless. Everything it was dies. And that's what awakening does to your psyche. It dissolves the identity that was running on fear and ambition. And what remains is silence. Unbearable at first, but sacred. But here's where most people get stuck. They confuse that dissolution with depression. They think the loss of motivation means something's broken. But Jung would say, you're not broken. You're being reborn. You're learning to live without illusion. You're shifting from external motivation, what society told you to want, to internal alignment, what your soul actually needs. The danger, though, is in the in-between. That space between who you were and who you're becoming. That's the void, the psychological desert, where nothing excites you, nothing feels real, nothing matters. It's terrifying, but it's also sacred ground, because this is where you stop chasing meaning and start embodying it. This is where the spiritual journey becomes psychological, where the search for enlightenment becomes a confrontation with your own unconscious. And that's where Jung's real genius comes in. He saw that awakening wasn't about escaping the ego, but integrating it. Because without integration, enlightenment is just another illusion. Let me explain. When people awaken, they often reject the material world. Money, goals, pleasure, ambition. They see these things as low vibration. But Jung warned, rejecting the world doesn't make you spiritual, it makes you divided. You can't transcend what you haven't yet embraced. And the moment you disown your earthly drives, they don't disappear. They go underground. They become shadows. And soon, you start to feel empty again, aimless again, because the psyche demands wholeness, not denial. The problem isn't that your motivation died. The problem is that it's waiting for a new purpose. A purpose that doesn't come from ego, but from essence. That's what Jung called the self, the deeper organizing center of the psyche, beyond the mask of personality. When you awaken, you're no longer living to become someone. You're living to express what you already are. That shift feels quiet, almost invisible, but it's the most radical transformation you'll ever experience. Because suddenly, you don't need the world to validate you. You don't need success to prove your worth. You act not out of hunger, but out of harmony. That's the moment your real motivation returns, not as a frantic chase, but as a calm current pulling you toward your destiny. So if you feel like awakening killed your drive, understand this. It didn't kill it, it purified it. It burned away what was false so that what's real could finally move through you. And yes, it feels like death. Because it is a kind of death. But every death in the psyche is just a doorway disguised as darkness. Step through it, and you'll see. Awakening never takes from you what you truly need. It only takes what was never real. When the fire of awakening burns away your illusions, what's left behind isn't peace, it's silence. And that silence terrifies most people. Because for the first time, you're not being chased by your desires. And you're not chasing anything either. You just are. And that's what the ego can't stand. Stillness. Carl Jung called this moment ego death. Not because your personality disappears, but because it loses control. The ego wants to be the master, the driver, the narrator of your life story. It thrives on goals, on victories, on resistance. It lives to say, I am this, I did that, I became someone. But when awakening arrives, that voice begins to fade, and what replaces it is something raw, ancient, and unfamiliar, a consciousness that simply observes. No story, no chase, just awareness. At first it feels empty, because you've been programmed your whole life to find meaning through motion, to measure yourself by progress, by comparison, by how much you're doing. But Jung warned, this compulsion to do is the ego's last trick, because as long as you're doing, you don't have to feel. When awakening hits, the doing stops. And suddenly, you're left with yourself, without noise, without identity. And that's when the shadows crawl in. This is the phase Jung called the confrontation with the unconscious. You start to meet the parts of yourself you've buried for years, your fears, insecurities, regrets, suppressed desires. They rise from the depths like ghosts, demanding recognition. That's why so many people, right after awakening, spiral into confusion or depression. It's not regression, it's integration. You're finally seeing everything the ego edited out. The stillness reveals what the noise used to hide. And it's not pretty, but it's real. Most people don't make it past this stage because they mistake discomfort for failure. They think, if I'm truly awakening, shouldn't I feel happy and at peace? But Jung would smile and say, peace isn't found by avoiding chaos. It's found by walking through it. You see, the ego was your armor. It kept you safe from life's rawness. But it also kept you disconnected from your soul. When that armor cracks, pain rushes in. Not because something's wrong, but because you're finally exposed to truth. And truth is never comfortable. But here's the paradox. That same stillness that feels empty at first slowly becomes sacred. Because when the noise fades, you begin to hear a deeper rhythm, not of thought, but of being. You start sensing life itself breathing through you. No effort, no struggle, just awareness, flowing effortlessly. That's when motivation transforms. It's no longer about chasing purpose, it's about becoming purpose. Every action starts to feel natural, intuitive, alive. You don't push the river anymore, you move with its current. But to get there, you must learn the hardest lesson Jung ever taught. You cannot awaken without descending. He wrote, no tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Meaning, your consciousness cannot expand upward unless it's anchored deep into your unconscious. You can't have light without darkness or peace without chaos. The death of the ego is that descent. It's the moment you stop identifying with your mind and begin to witness it instead. It's terrifying because it feels like losing yourself. But in truth, It's the beginning of remembering who you really are. This process strips away everything false, your social identity, your fears, even your ambitions, until what's left is the observer behind it all. That observer is what Jung would call the self, the true center of your psyche, the divine spark that watches without judgment. When you begin to live from this center, everything changes. You don't act out of ego anymore. You respond out of awareness. You don't force outcomes. You align with them. You don't chase meaning. You express it. The irony is, the more your ego dies, the more alive you become. Because for the first time, you're no longer split. You're whole. Here's something most people don't realize about spiritual awakening. It doesn't make you superhuman. It makes you real. And being real means you feel everything, the light and the dark, the joy and the sorrow, without running from any of it. That's the stillness Jung spoke about. Not a frozen calm, but a grounded awareness that can hold all of life without collapsing. You stop needing to escape reality. You start participating in it fully, consciously. Even the mundane becomes sacred. Making coffee, walking alone, watching the sunset. These small acts become portals into presence. Because once the ego dies, the divine steps in. Not as something separate or holy, but as the awareness behind every moment. So if awakening has made you feel numb, lost, or unmotivated, don't rush to fix it. Sit with it. That stillness you're resisting is not the end of your journey. It's the beginning of your real one. Because when the ego finally falls silent, the soul begins to speak. And what it says is simple. You were never lost. You were just asleep. And now you're waking up. When your old motivations die, it feels like your world collapses. You stop chasing goals that once defined you. Success, validation, even passion. They lose their taste. You look around, and everything feels hollow. It's as if life has lost its script, and you're standing in the middle of a quiet stage, unsure of your next line. Carl Jung knew this feeling better than anyone. He called it the night sea journey, the phase where your old self dissolves, but your new self hasn't yet emerged. It's the death between lives, the void between who you were and who you're becoming. And this void is sacred. Most people try to escape it. They run back to distractions, chase temporary highs, or fill the emptiness with noise, because silence feels unbearable. But Jung said this emptiness isn't a mistake. It's the womb of transformation, the place where meaning is reborn. You see, before awakening, you're driven by external motives, ambition, comparison, fear of failure. But after awakening, those outer forces no longer move you. You can't go back to pretending. The ego's games lose their shine. And so you fall into stillness, a silence that tests every fiber of your being. But Jung warned, beware of unearned wisdom. Because if you awaken too soon, without integrating your darkness, that wisdom will crush you instead of freeing you. That's why so many spiritually awakened people feel lost. They touched a deeper truth, but they didn't have the inner structure to hold it. So how do you rebuild meaning after awakening? Jung's answer was bold. You don't chase meaning, you create it. Meaning isn't something you find lying around in the universe. It's something you build with awareness, through the choices you make and the struggles you endure. The philosopher Viktor Frankl echoed this idea later. Life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. Jung believed your soul gives you clues through symbols, dreams, and synchronicities. These are not random events. They are messages from your unconscious, guiding you toward what truly matters. The problem is, most people are too busy chasing external rewards to notice them. After awakening, when everything slows down, you finally begin to see these signs. The books that find you, the thoughts that won't leave you, the strange coincidences that seem to point you in a direction you didn't plan. That's not the universe playing tricks. That's your deeper self, calling you home. Here's the truth Jung discovered. Your purpose isn't something you choose. It's something you uncover, and it's usually hidden in your suffering. Look at your pain, not the surface pain, but the recurring themes of your life, the patterns that keep repeating. Jung said those patterns are not curses, they're invitations. They point to the exact place where your growth and purpose lie. For example, if you've spent years struggling to be seen, your purpose might involve helping others feel understood. If you've faced rejection over and over, maybe your purpose is to teach resilience, not from theory, but from lived experience. Your wounds are not random. They're the blueprint for your contribution. That's the paradox Jung saw so clearly. The same darkness that breaks you also reveals what you were born to do. But there's something even deeper here, Jung's idea of individuation. It means becoming who you truly are, beyond society's expectations, beyond your roles and identities. When you awaken, the false layers of self begin to fall away, the masks you wore to fit in, the beliefs you inherited from family or culture, the habits that numbed your real feelings. Individuation is the process of stripping all of that, until what remains is your authentic essence. This essence doesn't seek motivation from outside, it radiates it from within. Because once you start living as your true self, purpose becomes effortless. You're no longer trying to be someone, you are someone. And here's the key difference Jung noticed between superficial spirituality and real awakening. Superficial spirituality wants escape. Real awakening demands embodiment. It's easy to meditate your pain away, to rise above suffering. But Jung said, that's not awakening, that's avoidance. Real spirituality is when you bring awareness into the chaos of daily life, when you act from your higher self while still walking through the mud of existence. When that happens, something beautiful emerges. Motivation returns, not the restless drive of the ego, but the calm fire of purpose. You don't force discipline anymore, it becomes devotion. You don't chase productivity, you become creative flow itself. You wake up each day not because you have to achieve something, but because you get to express something. The difference is subtle, but it changes everything. And slowly, that emptiness you once feared transforms into fullness. Not because the world changed, but because you did. You're no longer searching for meaning. You're living it. Jung wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." That's the rebirth. When you stop chasing the world's definitions of success and start listening to the quiet truth within you, motivation returns naturally. It's not about doing more. It's about doing what matters. And what matters isn't found in the noise of ambition, but in the silence of understanding. So if you're in that phase right now, lost, numb, uncertain, don't panic.
You're not broken. You're being rebuilt. The universe stripped away your old motivations because they were never truly yours. This emptiness you feel is the soil where real meaning will grow. Because when the ego dies, purpose isn't destroyed. It's purified. And from that purification, the soul begins to rise.
When you lose the illusions that once fueled you, the chase for success, admiration, or approval, life feels unbearably quiet at first. That silence can feel like death. But it isn't. It's the sound of truth emerging. Carl Jung understood that the end of false motivation is not the end of living. It's the beginning of being fully alive. Because until you see through the illusions that control you, you're not truly free. You're just performing, for the world, for others, for your own ego. When the illusions fall apart, a strange thing happens. The world loses its color, but your soul begins to see. That's the phase most people never survive, because they mistake clarity for despair. They think, if nothing excites me anymore, I must be broken. But Jung would whisper, no, you're waking up. This is the psychology of transformation he spent his life describing. The moment when your old motivations die, and you must decide whether to go back to the comfort of illusion or step forward into authenticity, into a life that is no longer about performance but truth. Jung said that the most terrifying journey a person can take is inward.
Because there, you confront the parts of yourself that the world never taught you to love. Your fear, your envy, your anger, your doubt. But when you stop running from them, something miraculous happens. They stop controlling you. This is where the shadow integration begins.
You realize that your inner darkness was never evil. It was energy waiting to be understood. The traits you rejected, your ambition, your pride, your desires, were never wrong. They were just unacknowledged. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That's the real awakening, not the blissful escape, but the grounded clarity that comes when you finally meet yourself without filters. Now here's where true motivation returns, the kind that can't be destroyed. When you integrate your shadow, you no longer act out of fear or validation. You act out of alignment. Every action, every choice begins to feel sacred because it comes from a place of awareness, not compulsion. Think about it. When you were chasing external goals, your energy came from anxiety, from a desperate need to become something. But when you awaken, your energy starts coming from peace, from the joy of simply being. You no longer need to prove your worth. You express it. You don't need to find meaning. You create it through your consciousness. This is what Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Because when you become that, when you live from your center, motivation is no longer an effort. It's an expression of your nature. But let's be honest, living without illusion is not easy. It means giving up the comforting lies that the world rewards, that happiness comes from status, that love comes from approval, that peace comes from avoiding pain. The awakened mind sees through these games, and for a while, that clarity feels lonely. Because now, you see how many people live asleep, chasing what doesn't matter, pretending everything's fine. But slowly, this loneliness transforms into liberation. You realize you don't need to fit in, because you were never meant to. You don't need to be liked, because you're not here to please. You're here to evolve. That's when your inner power returns. Quiet, steady, unshakable. You stop reacting to the world and start creating from within it. You stop asking for motivation and start becoming it. This is the final phase Jung envisioned. The self-emerging, whole, and integrated. Not the ego-chasing light, but the complete human being who has accepted both light and darkness, who has made peace with contradiction, who can love without illusion and act without fear. Such a person doesn't need to shout. Their presence alone speaks. They don't chase meaning, they embody it. They don't seek motivation, they are motivation. That's the terrifying and beautiful truth Jung discovered. When your illusions die, your soul is finally free to live. So if you've lost your drive, if you feel detached from the things that once defined you, understand this. It's not the end, it's the purification. The universe is burning away your false ambitions to reveal the diamond underneath, your authentic purpose. And that purpose doesn't scream, it whispers. It asks only one thing: live in truth. When you live in truth, you no longer depend on external energy, because your energy becomes self-renewing. It flows from awareness, from integrity, from the joy of becoming real. You don't chase success anymore. You attract it, not because you're trying, but because authenticity is magnetic. And when that happens, when you finally stop performing and start existing, you become unstoppable. Because there's nothing left to lose and everything left to give. Carl Jung didn't teach escape, he taught embodiment. He didn't promise happiness, he promised wholeness. And in wholeness, there's a peace that no achievement can buy, the peace of knowing you are finally you. So if this message touched something in you, if you feel ready to rebuild your motivation from the inside out, remember, this is just the beginning. You are not lost. You are being redefined. And when you rise this time, it won't be from illusion. It will be from truth. If this resonated with you, Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because there's a whole world of untold psychology waiting to be explored. After all, the deepest awakening isn't about escaping life, it's about learning how to live it, fully awake.